Norwegian tax administration office doesn't know everything about you. So you need to make sure yourself that you applied for all the deductions, because it can be many thousand kroners of your tax. Deductions you're entitled to depends on your finances and your life situation. You always need to check. Maybe there has been changes that tax administration office doesn't know about. Maybe you sold your house, maybe you moved, or maybe you retired. Let's see if we can find something to apply here. In 2024, tax declaration will be available to everyone from 7 to 21st of March. There is some important deadlines to remember, and first of all is 30th of April is a deadline to deliver your edited tax return report back to state. Also, 30th of April is a deadline to apply for postponed deadline if you don't have enough time to edit your tax return report. If you applied for postponed deadline, you need to deliver your tax return before 31st of May. Also, the 31st of May is a deadline for paying your taxes back without interest if you owe something to the state. And 26th of June is the last day when all the employees get their checked tax return report back from state. When you get it back, you get your tax paid if you are entitled to any return. If you didn't get a tax return before end of June, then the second wave is from 21st of August and all the way till end of November. Usually, if you're entitled to some taxes back, you also get paid around that dates when you get your final tax return report. So the reason why you didn't get your tax return in June, it can be a few of them. First of all, maybe you made a lot of changes and add a lot of attachments to your tax return. They have to check it. Most common reason is that you are self-employed. Also, you don't get it probably if you ask for postponed deadline, if you have been chosen for random checks. Also, there can be that your spouse is self-employed, because married couple in Norway usually get tax return together. So if one is not ready, then another also need to wait. So let's look at the most common deductions that you can add to your tax return report this year. I broke it down in a few groups, so it's easier to understand and remember, but it's not very practical to go over all of them in one video. So if you want all of them in one list, I suggest you check link in my description. There is a full article in my Patreon account that has all of the deductions explained in details. So first group of deductions is for parents, and first of all it's deductions for the parents who has variable expenses for their kids under age of 11. As a parent, you are entitled to get deduction on daycare, kindergarten, on nanny, full-time or part-time, on after-school activities or sport activities. It's called AX in Norway. Also expenses related to driving your kid forth and back to daycare, nannies, after-school activities. Here you get the same deduction as for expenses related to driving to work. Also, you can claim deduction for activities outside of after-school program if your child don't go to AX, for example, but it has to be at least 3 times a week. It has to be straight after school, so no evening or weekend classes. It has to be made for kids from 5 to 11 years old, and there is a rule that everyone can participate. So these activities should have one lunch break and follow rules for school vacations and free days. So if, for example, your child goes to swimming in the weekends or 7 p.m., you cannot get a deduction for this kind of classes. Also, you can get the deductions for care of older children over 12 years old and that has special need due to the disability. These deductions are limited to 25,000 kroner for the first child and up to 15,000 kroner for each next child. So let's say if you have 3 kids, then you will be entitled to 55,000 kroner a year maximum of your tax. And in some cases, state will ask you to provide documentation for these expenses. Kindergarten and AX are usually pre-filled in your tax return report, so what you need to do is just go over the numbers and check that they are correct. Usually in January you get a document from kindergarten and school called årsoppgave. It's the yearly sums up about how much you paid in the previous year, and this is numbers that should match with numbers in your tax return report. If they are not, then go and adjust them manually. For the rest of the expenses, you will either need to attach the proof from your bank that you paid it or some kind of receipts that you paid to nannies or after-school activities, maybe invoices. That can be bank transfers from VIPs, and it cannot be paid in cash if it's more than 10,000 kroner a year. Everything that exceeds 10,000 kroner a year, you have to document if you want to have deduction for it. Also, if your child has a disability, you might need to provide a paper from doctor doctor or child services. All these deductions you can find in section Family and Health in your tax return report. Next category of deductions we're gonna look at is deductions for workers. For those who work in Norway, you can claim the deductions for traveling expenses. In a nutshell, is the distance between your home and permanent working place. If it's more than 37 kilometers as a round trip, so forth and back, you can claim a deduction if your traveling cost exceeds 14,000 kroner a year. On this deduction, you can get up to 97,000 kroner, and you're entitled to this deduction regardless of what transportation you use or your actual expenses. What you need to do is to go to calculator. I can also leave a link below, and you simply put address of your home and address of permanent work, and you see how many kilometers you get and how much deduction you can get. If it's less than 14,000 kroner a year, then you will be not entitled to any deduction, because 14,000 kroner is a minimum that you need to pay of own share. So if you need to stay somewhere other than home because of your work, then you have right for commuting expenses, and this is actually given for the cost of renting or paying for place to stay, maybe your food expenses and your daily expenses. You need to see if you're qualified for commuting. There's quite a few rules. I'm not going to go over them in this video, but what I want to say is that you are entitled to get a deduction for all these expenses if they are not covered by your employee from the beginning, and if you don't live with your parents. Also, if you want this deduction, you cannot rent out your primary residence while you're away. Maximum amount here that you can get, it's also 83,000 kroner a year, and this includes the expenses for living, traveling and food. Again, you cannot claim this deduction if your employee paid your trips, and you cannot claim the deductions for traveling of your family, so it's just for you and your tickets. So if you have a family, you will need to pay it on your own. If you will be chosen for control, then you need to have documentations on hand that proves all your cost for your journeys. So it can be tickets, receipts where the route, name and date states. Also, it can be documentation about fees for tolls, ferries, flying tickets and so on. Other deductions you can get as a worker is if you are a member in a working union and you paying membership fee. So in 2024, you can get up to 7,700 kroner in deduction if you paid the membership fee in working union. What you need to do is to attach a receipt that you paid this membership, or you can ask documentation from your employee if your employer paying this membership cost for you. Also, you can get the deduction if you needed to move because of a new job position. This applies to moving expenses from abroad to Norway and from Norway to abroad, but of course if you're still paying taxes in Norway. This deduction includes expenses that occurs in order to take a new position before you decided to move. Here you can deduct your traveling expenses, cost of moving household goods, all the movable property, including packaging, insurance cost, and so on. You will find all these deductions in the section Employment Insurances and Pension in your tax return report. It's important to remember that everyone who works in Norway automatically gets something that calls Minstefradrag. Minstefradrag is a deduction which are meant to cover all your expenses related to work, and it's 104,400 Norwegian kroners. This should cover your traveling, car, your business trips, your education related to work, maybe your working tools, clothes. So if you know that you spend more than 1,400 kroner a year on all this cost, then it's better to apply manually for each deduction yourself. If you don't spend more than that, then you just stick to this general deduction that state gives you. You cannot use both of them at the same time. So for those who have properties, loans and stocks, you can get deduction related to your housing. First of all, if you're renting primary or secondary property and paying taxes out of this income, you're entitled to deductions related to maintenance, municipal fees that you pay, or maybe insurance. If you sold your property with loss last year, you have right to deductions as well. Also, if you own a flat in condominium or a housing company, in Norwegian is boligaksjeselskap or boligsamie, you can deduct interest expenses that company has. Also, all the losses that this company or condominium managed to get during the year. Also, there is deductions on losses that this company or condominium managed to get the last year. It can be loss related to sold assets, properties, and so on. Usually all this zabba-dabba is pre-filled in your tax return report, and you get a report from your housing company in January that states how much deduction it will be. You just need to check if there is any mistakes and if numbers are matched and correct. If it's not, if something is wrong or missing, then you need to manually put the company name, cost, liabilities, and the reason for changing. I explain it in the details in article in Patreon. So what is deduction related to loans and financial assets that you can get? First of all, you can claim a deduction on all the interest that you paid on your loans, if you have any. If you refinanced your loan last year, you can claim deduction for establishing fee, for basically for all the expenses related to that, cost of borrowing, cost related to converting loans in order to get a lower interest rate, and so on. If you sold with loss your shares, funds, bonds, or whatever that was your financial products, then you have a right for deduction as well. Again, those are pre-filled in your tax return report usually, and if something is wrong or missing, you can edit it in section bank, loans and insurance. Also, there is one more thing, and it's called BSO account. In Norway, we have something called BSO. It's account for youngsters under 33 years old who is saving for their first property to buy in Norway, and this is the account where you can put maximum 300,000 kroner. I will not go in details in this video on what is BSO and how you open it. I just want to note that if you already have it and if you set some money last year into this account, you're entitled to deductions in your taxes. The maximum amount of money you can save in year on this account, it's 27,500 kroner, and it can give you a maximum deduction on your tax up to 5,500 kroner. Usually it's also pre-filled in your tax return report, but if it's not, then you just know that you're entitled to it and you can add it there. So in this video, I'm not including the deductions for health, for gifts, hobbies or small jobs. Also, there's some more deductions related to your work, bank, housing and education. Full list of these deductions you can find on my Patreon account with explanation of what you can get, how to apply and what documentation you need to provide.